Thanks for tuning in. Just a friendly reminder, our producer, Abuh Monday's book, Written in Legos, the hardcover of that edition is now out. So be sure to check it out in the link in the description below. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to perhaps our most special episode ever of Daily Wisdom Words podcast, where every week we're in conversation with people who have stories, advice, and life hacks, all of which take you one step closer to that feeling of hope. I'm your co-host, Neil Trivedi, joined by Tiana. It is our highest honor and the greatest pleasure to introduce the president of the American Psychology Association, best-selling author, fellow podcaster, minister, TED Talk speaker, so many things. Her credentials are miles long. The one and only Dr. Thema Bryant-Davis. Hello, Dr. Thema. Very warm welcome to you on our show.
Oh, thank you so much. I am so excited to be able to connect with you both and to your community, and just been looking forward to the conversation.
We thought, this topic was chosen very carefully by all of us is because everywhere we are seeing people are dealing with some kind of grief, either separation, deaths in the family. And so we thought, who better than you to talk about the subject?
Oh, thank you. Well,
Yeah.
you are right. There is so much grief that people are facing, visible and invisible losses, the pandemic, and then other reasons that have led to deaths both in older age as well as even our children and youth. And it is a lot. It has a cumulative effect. And so I'm glad for us to be able to name it and to begin to talk about our healing.
Yeah. One thing that you always stress is being honest with yourself, right, about the situations in life. And I know that's a big thing with you. How can we start out if we're dealing with grief, either and not necessarily even a passing away or a separation or a divorce or whatever, how do we start that journey? What is the first thing that should we tell ourselves to be honest with to start that path of healing?
Yes. So it is important to recognize that our emotions are not weakness. Our emotions are indicators of our humanity and that we are alive. And with much grief, there has often been much love. So it is, a part of our caring. So as you named, even if it's a breakup, separation, or divorce, whether you're the person who initiated or not, at some point there was likely a good season, right? At some point there was a hope and a sense that this was going to be a longer season than it was. And so there is grief involved in that. And then when we're talking about the death of a loved one, that there is, even though you hold on to your memory and may even feel their presence, to not have their physical presence, to not be able to just pick up the phone and call, to not be able to, like, something great happens for you or something terrible happens to you. And usually that's the person you would reach out to. And in a physical sense, in a natural sense, you're not able to do that. And so it is to give ourselves permission to have the full range of human emotions and to release the timeline. So often we say, like, I should be over it by now. But there are many factors that can keep it alive. And there are also continuous reminders. You drive past a place where you went with that person, or it's their birthday, or the holidays are usually a time you would be together. So these reminders come up, and it doesn't mean we're back to ground zero. It just means that we remember, and there was deep connection there, possibly a deep love there. And so it is also important to give ourselves permission and acknowledgement to feel more than one thing at the same time. because sometimes when people are sharing their heartache or their grief, people will dismiss them by saying things like, well, you should be grateful for the time you had. And just because you're grieving doesn't mean you're not grateful, right? The grief can be more because I'm grateful of how special this was. And so to think about all of the different emotions, there can be uh, breakups and in death, there can be a relief and a missing at the same time. And so to gravitate toward people with whom you do not have to pretend or perform, right? Some people are uncomfortable with our pain and distress, so they put a demand on us to quote unquote pull it together or to act like everything is fine. And when your heart is heavy, the last thing you need to do is to spend all your time in places where you have to fake it. So, right, reach out to those friends or family members who maybe they get it because they've also had losses, or they just get it because they love you and want to be a place where you can be honest about where you are. And then I would say it's important to start trying to develop some daily routine, because you can feel like a loss of time in a sense that like everything is out of order, right? That everything is lost. And so when you're losing track of time, you can start to neglect yourself. So to say in the aftermath of whatever the loss was or whoever the loss was, like, did I eat today? Or like, maybe I need to turn off the television and go to bed, right? Maybe I need to put this phone down and actually rest or go for a walk. And so creating some routine can help you to get into living.
Right. I was just going to ask that, and I think it's a perfect like transition to how is there any way to like comprehend or understand how much is too much, like to give each other give yourself the time to grieve and acknowledge it, and of course, but that was literally going to be my next question. Like, is there a way to tell, okay, like, okay, it's time for me to at least attempt to start doing routine things again and not like wallow and be in that mode all day, right? Because we certainly can't let it affect our day-to-day lives and our other endeavors that we have going on.
Right. So, clinically, we would say, at least a year before, a therapist would say, start to question, is there a sense of being stuck, right? And so, but at the same time, when we think about our specific lives, the challenge becomes like some people don't have a year in the sense of may have responsibilities.
Yeah.
So let's say you're grieving the loss of your parent, but you have children, right? Maybe small children. So then it becomes, well, like I have to try to mobilize myself, like I need to get out of the bed to get them to school, or, or work demands. So it is acknowledging and recognizing the demands on your life, but also giving yourself a lot of grace and compassion. And it also is a reminder for us to show up for people beyond like that 1 week, right? So usually like the week of the service, usually people will like bring food or ask if you need anything or check in with you. What most people who have lost will say, it's weeks and months later, or even like on the 1 year anniversary, needing people to check in. And so to be willing to ask for help, let's say on this morning, I just don't have it. Like I can't get up. Is there a friend I can call who can say, I can say, can you take the kids to school, or like just give me like a 1 hour break or whatever, an afternoon. So to get those supports, to consider therapy, and at the same time, to be mindful of that internal sense, like there's a difference between I'm feeling the missing and I'm feeling the grieving versus I'm worried about myself. Like I am feeling that I'm on edge, or, I'm thinking differently and I'm like scaring me. then even if it's been a couple of weeks or months, if you feel that sense of urgency, that, to not wait to reach out, that it can be helpful, whether a grief support group or a therapist or whoever you choose to walk this process out with, recognizing that there will never be a season of your life where you won't notice, right? But it becomes more manageable and more integrated. So you may say, 5 years from now, I may get a promotion and I wish like my mom could be there to see it. So you're going to feel that. And it doesn't mean that you're not healing. It is that that's a spot in your life that is not replaceable. So I can have friends, I can have all these other things, but I am mindful of like this other presence that I wish could be there.
Thank you. Yeah. My biggest question for you, Dr. Tamer, I guess, was, well, you talk a lot about coming home to yourself, which helped me move out of some very complex PTSD and all of that. And still, but I found it's really like a daily honoring of where we're at and our emotions. I love that you mentioned that. And I just wanted to know if you have any suggestions in particular for moving gracefully through that grief. And just like being mindful as you were saying. Anything else you want to share?
Sure. So, when it's the death of a loved one, it can be helpful to think about the best of them I would like to live in me. And so, what are the lessons that I learned from them? Either they directly told me or just watching and observing their lives, that in that way I can honor them in my living, as opposed to this feeling of guilt of like, I can't enjoy life now because that would be a betrayal of them. But instead, me enjoying life is a tribute to them and what I learned from them, right? What I gained from them. And if these are people who love you, that is a hope or desire that they would have for you, right? For me not to have to prove my love by standing still for the rest of my life, right? But that I can carry them, their wisdom, their heart with me. And then I would say, as it relates to the ending of a relationship, that it's important to get into doing the things that define you, because you were a person before that relationship. And sometimes we've lost sight of ourselves and made the relationship our identity, made the marriage our identity. And so it is to reclaim yourself. And so it's like, what are the things that give you joy? What are the things that even if they weren't there, you would do them because that's what you love to do? And then I would definitely encourage, when we're talking about a breakup or end of relationship, to at least take a break from contact unless you're co-parenting together, but not following them on social media, at least in those beginning stages, because that keeps them as the center of your life. Like, now I have to see, what did they say today? What did they post today? Who are they with today? And so that keeps me from building my life, because I am a monitor of your life. And so I need to reclaim my attention and my focus, and also to heal our esteem and self-worth, because it is likely in the relationship some things were said or done that chipped away at your worthiness. And so then when you question or doubt yourself, you can not take good care of yourself. You can enter into other relationships where now unacceptable things are acceptable because that became the norm. And so I have to rebuild my sense of myself so that I'm not seeing myself through their eyes. And I would also say a growth point around relationship dynamics. And, I say this uh, with the exception of domestic violence or partner abuse. But if that is not the dynamic, that there is a role that each of us played. And so a part of your growth will be able to not just say like what was wrong with them, but for me to have the awareness of like, how did I contribute to that dynamic, or what was going on in me that I selected such a person, or that I stayed in such a circumstance. That's the only way that I can grow, is if I can see my part. And so once I can acknowledge that, then I carry that wisdom. It's not to beat yourself up, but I carry that wisdom with me so that in the next relationship, I show up differently. I show up wiser, maybe show up more compassion. I show up with more clarity. And so we can grow from those experiences.
Yeah, that is really profound.
You
Yeah.
hit on everything I needed to hear right now.
Good. I'm so glad. I'm so glad we need those reminders and that clarity. And one of the things, I have talked about recently is endings. And this not only, I should say, not only romantic relationships, but even friendships, or even leaving a job, that, we throw out these labels of like, you're a quitter, or that you failed. And the reality is that could be your graduation, right? that you were willing to walk away from what is familiar, and trust yourself that that season of your life is over and it's time for a new season. And so that's a gift. It is not just that you gave up easily or that you quit the job. Some of us, to honor ourselves or even to save ourselves, need to learn to say goodbye. And that's the way you can reclaim yourself.
Yeah. Is there, like you mentioned earlier on, about how we can have multiple emotions, right, in us when we're going through these periods?
Right.
We can feel sad and one way or another way at the same time. So I think it's natural to ask. This is a brilliant question by Tiana, actually. I got to give her the credit, but it just makes sense to ask it now. Do we ever permanently move on from grief, or is it learning to manage it just properly and not let it become a hindrance in our day-to-day lives?
Yeah, so I would say the death of a loved one is, it's never a place where you just say, I'm over it, right? I would say with relationships, some people do get to that place because they can get so clear that it needed to end, right? So that even if you see something that reminds you of the person, it's like, oh yeah, they used to like that, but it's not a feeling of like, and I wish I was back there. It's just like, oh yeah, that reminded me of that person. So there can be that sense, and I would say there are other people who permanently kind of feel like I'm longing for this person, or I wish that person was in my life. And at the same time, at some point, in order to love and honor yourself, you have to release who has not chosen you, right? It becomes a dishonoring of myself. It becomes, I need to question, what is it in me that is drawn to someone who doesn't want me? Why is it that them not wanting me makes me want them more? So then we have like a deeper issue. It's not just that they're so fabulous, right? It's, there are some maybe life experiences before you met this person that gave you the script that you have to earn love. And so then I'm gonna fight for it. I'm gonna convince them I'm good. And then when people actually like me, I don't like them. Right? So now we're like, okay, we've got to have a shift in mindset. Why is it that people who adore you, you find ridiculous? And you're only drawn to people who are unavailable. So, then we have some deeper healing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I was gonna say, is that like just not everybody I know, no matter how strong they are inwards, outwards, we all seem to go through that phases in our lives where we want somebody's attention or want their like pat on the back or in however form, love or friendship or whatever. It makes me wonder. So that's totally normal, right? That's a human thing. We need to work on it, but it's normal to feel that way.
Well, what happens often when we're in that place is it's the fantasy and
Mm.
not the reality, right?
Yeah.
So it's
Right.
like, some people have dysfunctional, unhealthy relatives. And
Yeah.
so they wish this person was there at this big moment in their life. But then when those people in their real self show up, they could ruin your moment, right? They'll ruin your wedding, they'll ruin your reception. So your desire for them to be there was not actually them. It's your fantasy of who you wish they could be, right? Like, I wish I had the kind of parent or sibling who would show up and affirm me and celebrate me and not like be jealous or trying to ruin my event or so one of our liberating moments is when we mature to be able to see people in their full humanity versus our picture of who we would like them to be.
One of the things that I was curious about, you obviously are a very busy person. That is an understatement. So, what are some things you do to ground yourself, not just with the bigger things like grief, and obviously that's part and parcel of everybody's life, but just stressful days or just days where you're like, oh my God, I want this day to end, like, so I can, what do you personally do to sort of ground yourself? Maybe techniques? Do you do meditation? I know sacred artist and art and dance is a big part of your life. So if you could share some of those things and maybe some tips for our audience as well.
Yes, certainly. So I am a big advocate of morning rituals or morning devotion. So starting the day by doing things that feed your spirit. So that may be reading a sacred text, it may be meditating, praying, journaling, listening to music or listening to a podcast. It's important for us to know that we can set the tone for our day, right? As opposed to showing up thirsty and hungry and needing experiences or jobs or people to feed us when we have not done anything to put something in our own well. So then that allows me when I show up, I'm not showing up with an empty well, like I'm showing up and able to give from my overflow. So, I remember toward the beginning of the year, I attended one of my APA, American Psychological Association board meetings, and one of the staff said to me, "You always seem so happy. Is that real?" Like, yes, because I nourished myself before I was up in the hotel room. I come into the boardroom, and I'm not coming in stressed, right? I'm not coming in wondering like what's going to happen today. Like I have already set my intention, right? I have already taken my breath. And then I come down and you all are serving breakfast, and this is great. We're going to have a good meeting. So to not just be reactive, but to be empowered. You have agency and you can make some decisions because we shift the atmosphere, right? It's like if I come in all like this, then like the whole board is going to be like, oh, what's going on? What's going on? So you can set the atmosphere, at your job, in your family life, by the way in which you show up. And it doesn't mean like, is everybody gonna be on that path? No, but it also means I'm not easily moved, right? I'm not easily thrown off because people are going to show up with their stuff or like they didn't take breath before they walked in, but I don't have to let that throw me off. I can observe it with compassion, but I'm not going to catch it.
Yeah. Was that a like tough to get to that stage in your healing journey to like not, because we always say, right, there are things in our control and then there are things that are not. And
Yeah.
so finding that balance and not letting what's not in your control affect you, did that take time?
Right. It did in its perspective taking. And, what's helpful for me is, like I, like many of us, have been through some major things. So when I have that in my mind, when these little things happen, how am I going to act like this is a disaster? Like I have lived through some things. So like, oh, okay, the speaker we were expecting is running late. And so like, what we got 20 minutes to kill. I can come up with something we could do for 20 minutes. This isn't a disaster, right? So it
Right.
helps us to put things in perspective of, we are stormtroopers, right? We have survived like major moments. And so a lot of these moments that can have us stressed out in comparison are minor. So it's not to minimize it or dismiss it, but it is to remind myself of my capacity. Like if I could get through this, surely I can get through this, right?
Yeah.
So what is that saying? People say it's not my first rodeo. So yeah, and some of us started having to face rodeos at like before the age of 10, right? So I remember little Tama, right? Little Tama carried some stuff on her shoulders. So, that's who I am. So you got to remind yourself that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that we always ask this to guests who have like been through a journey and then, hit the road to success. One thing I always like to know is if you could tell little Tama one thing looking back, what would the successful Dr. Tama tell her right now?
Yes. I would say to her, Tama, it gets so much better. Hold on. Yeah.
That's really great.
It's like you just got to outlast it. Like this, there are going to be some seasons. It feels a mess. It is a mess, but it gets sweeter.
And I love that you keep bringing up the seasons. When you first said that, I got a full body chill. And I keep getting body chills as you keep talking. Like, I needed to hear all of this, but
Yes.
seasons of life, it's
Right.
always
They
changing.
pass. They
Mhm.
pass. And the
Yeah.
season will change. And the challenge season will come again. It's like, I was telling you all before we started recording, my daughter's a senior in high school and, she's launching off to college and she's going to be in another state. And I appreciate it. One of my good friends just on yesterday said she's going to be fine and there are going to be some challenges and she's going to be fine. But I needed to hear that too, because we'll have in our mind, like, I need like her to have the perfect roommate. I need like everything to be, and it's like, there are going to be hiccups, that's a part of the journey and it'll still be okay.
Yeah, I don't want to hog all the questions, Tiana. So if whatever you had in, I felt like, oh my God, so there's no awkward, but go for it. Like, I know you had like a couple more questions. Please be a part of it.
I guess I would just love to know, Dr. Tama, like what first inspired you just to follow this healing work, and if there are other people, like I think Neil and myself are very called to help others and heal, and how do you do that while also kind of integrating your own self-care and just acknowledging where you're at, and maybe there are days you aren't able to like hop on that podcast, but
Yes, yes. So first I'll say, you know, ultimately healers are born, not made. And so, I can point to things that happen, later in life or when I learned about the field of psychology. So even before I learned about it as a profession, um, this is how powerful language is because people can describe it in a negative way when it's actually a gift. But growing up, I would have been described as a sensitive kid, you know. So I would feel things deeply. I remember reading the story The Ugly Duckling and crying because this little duck, was like, oh my God. So that's just who I am. It's how I showed up to the planet. And, as opposed to our sensitivity or compassion or observation being weakness, like those are gifts. Now, some people, when I say that, they haven't learned how to hold it. So for them, it doesn't feel like a gift, it feels like a burden. But when you learn how to hold that with boundaries, it's a gift. You notice things other people don't notice, right? You pay attention to things just other people miss, and you actually like people. It's terrible. People who work with people and actually don't like people. It's like maybe you should go do something else, because that's a big, when we look at therapeutic outcomes, a big predictor of whether it's effective is what they call the therapeutic relationship, which makes sense. Like if you feel like your therapist gets you, that they care about you, that they're really present, it's going to be a lot more effective than if you just feel like you're the 3 o'clock or you're whatever. So that care and compassion. But then the second part you were saying about, how we hold that without losing ourselves is so important. And so, a big part of my journey was discovering, realizing, remembering that I am worthy of the care that I desire to give to others.
Yes.
Right? Because we can be so, if you're too focused out there, you can neglect yourself. So one of the stories I tell in the book Homecoming is when I first started my practice, I kept missing lunch because I would get calls from people who needed a same day appointment. And the only hour I had free was my lunchtime. And I would do this false choice in my head of what's more important, them healing or me eating a sandwich? Right? And I say, I don't need this sandwich. Come at 12 o'clock. And then one day I was in session and I'm giving this heartfelt message to this client about how she should take care of herself. And as I'm giving this heartfelt message, my stomach starts growling. And I'm like, what in the world? A fraud, right? A hypocrite. So I had to have a meeting with myself of am I just going to say these things or do I want to live it? Right? And I decided I want to live it. I don't want to just quote things to people of what they should do while I'm not doing any of it. And so it also helps us to recognize there are many, many people with gifts. So in the pandemic was my first time having to put a sign on my website that I'm no longer taking new clients. And that was so hard for me to do because you always want to be available, especially as a person of color. I know we're underrepresented in the field. So it takes a lot for people to want to see a therapist. So when they reach out to me, I don't want to say no. And at the same time, it's I can't do this all day, all night and be a good parent and be good to myself. And it's just not good. And then what was amazing is, I put the sign up, no more new people. And I'm a professor at Pepperdine. So I have so many former students. So I started referring people to my former students who in the beginning of the pandemic had 4 clients. And it's they all got full to the point where they're like, Dr. Thema, don't send us anybody else. So it was, that blessing and reminder. Here it is. When you're a trauma survivor, you can feel like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. And so when I remind myself, I'm not carrying the world, right? So it's not oh, if I don't do it, no one can do it. There are a lot of people who can do it, right? So, call this one, call that one. I got a request yesterday and, I could give them 5 other therapist names. So that helps to set the boundary to know it's not you or nothing. There are other people in the world. Yeah.
That's to acknowledge that you need to put those boundaries up
Right.
for yourself.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. We normally we say oh, where can people, but it would be highly foolish of me to ask somebody like you, Dr. Thema, where can people, because Google Earth. But I will say I thought it would be fun to unless, let me just make sure, Tia, anything else that's you're being called to ask? I just want to make sure. I don't want to
answered my questions 10
oh my God.
Yeah.
Yes, right? That's why, oh my God, this was like the best episode ever. I'm never gonna forget
Don't get emotional yet, Neil. I'm going to cry after this.
I thought it would be fun. I know this is a usual thing for you on your podcast and other platforms where you assign homework. It's not the bad kind, people. It's the healing kind. So don't be put off by that, for those who
Yes.
don't know. So any homework for
Mm-hmm.
myself, Tiana, our listeners, or anybody
Yes.
struggling? Anything
Yes.
you'd assign to us?
I would love to give the homework for this week for you to call a friend and have a genuine conversation, to tell them the truth about where you are and what's happening with you, hopes, dreams, fears. We often isolate ourselves when we're struggling, or we talk to people, but we keep it very surface. So we put ourselves in that corner and then say, like, nobody's here for me. But then we don't open up. So to have a real conversation with someone this week, both not only hearing from them, but you sharing as well.
Wow. This is like, I don't want this to end, but you answered like everything so perfectly and succinctly, and it's like it's this perfect thing that I don't like. Wow.
Yeah, I
So
went back, Neil, to look. I went back and looked at my little questions I wrote down. I'm like, nope, she answered literally.
right.
Oh, good. Well, I am glad for us to be able to have this time, and I understand this is a labor of love as another podcaster or podcast host. And so I know you all do so much for your community, and I'm glad for you to be able to receive as well, because we're worthy of receiving too.
Yeah. Perfect note. And Dr. Thema, thank you again. So I can't thank you enough times for doing this. This is like a huge moment for myself and Tiana, just not just for this podcast, but just overall. So thank you so, so much. Really appreciate it. Really.
You're welcome. You all take care.
All right. Bye.